Now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Dr. Natasha Burgert is an innovative pediatrician from Kansas City, Missouri. She's a spokesperson for the American Academy of Pediatrics, and her blog, kckidsdoc.com, covers topics from nursing, diaper rash, to consumer safety concerns about products that are marketed to young parents. She's a prolific speaker on pediatric practice in the digital age, and she joins us today as the medical and developmental voice from the Wait Until 8th team. Natasha has 2 children of her own, ages 12 and 8. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you so much.
And Brooke Shannon, she's the mother of 3 daughters, ages 11, 10, and 6, from Austin, Texas, and she took her passion for true experiential childhood, along with the escalating concerns she saw from other parents, to becoming the founding director of a national movement that we bring you today, Wait Until 8th Pledge. So Brooke has a master's in integrated marketing communications from Northwestern University and a BA in political science and communications from University of Miami. And Brooke's created both a structure, I think, that you'll see today, and a community for parents interested in holding off children's smartphone use and protecting that creative, playful, child-centered learning that makes children thrive. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you so much for having me, Jean.
This is such an important webinar for our Action Network because it provides one specific solution. So there's so much discourse about screen time and so much discussion between parents and practitioners and teachers, and this is one way that parents might want to try that will give them a solution. So without further ado, we'll get right into today's topic. So Brooke, screen time, as we've discussed, is such a hot topic. Can you explain to our audience, to begin, just what is Wait Until 8th and what inspired you to start it?
The Wait Until 8th Pledge is a pledge that was just started by a group of parents that were concerned about screen time in kids and about kids having access to these devices at such a young age. And the Wait Until 8th Pledge helps empower parents to hold off on when they give children a smartphone until at least the 8th grade. And I started this pledge a couple years ago with some other parents in Austin because we were seeing so many children coming to the park, to the playgrounds, to parties, to school, with these devices at such a young age. Some as young as 7, 8, 9 years old with the latest iPhone. And as a mom, I just wanted the future for my kiddos to look different. I was not ready to go down this path yet. But at the same time, I didn't want my kids to be the only ones with their heads up. I wanted more families out there to be holding off on this important decision together. And so it really just started as a group of parents being concerned, and we talked about the issue, and what we kept hearing was that so many parents end up giving a smartphone to their children because there's such pressure to do so. It just takes a few kids in your child's class with the latest iPhone and the campaigning starts, and before you know it, people just start falling like dominoes, and it starts to feel like your child may be the only one. And you don't want them to be left out or isolated. And so at a certain point, the pressure just gets to be too much. The idea was, like, let's come together as a community and hold off on when we're giving these devices to our children together. And with the support of each other, we can hold off a little bit longer if we were just doing it on our own.
I think the key thing you said there, Brooke, is community. I think parents have, long not wanted to be the bad guy, not wanted to be the only one, or have their kids to be ostracized or feel like they're the only one with screen time rules in their homes. And we know it's a concern with many parents, but that parents weren't talking about it among themselves. So, Natasha, I was wondering if you could speak to, parents wanting that line in the sand, parents coming to practitioners and saying, oh, what is the right age? What is the right age? And I know I tend to kind of fumble that answer and say, well, it depends on the child, depends on the household. But can you talk to us about what child development looks like in the smartphone age, and specifically what is harmful about having a smartphone at younger ages?
Yeah, I love this question because it is challenging for a lot of parents. They really do want an answer to that question, and you're exactly right, Jean. It's it's very variable and hard to draw that line in the sand. But as a pediatrician who takes care of these little ones, I'm witnessing in live time kind of the changes of what we're seeing in these early childhood development phases, and screens and screen time are definitely a component to deficit, in my opinion. I think when we're thinking about child development, we're thinking about the brain. And I think about the brain having two necessary parts. So obviously it has to have nutrition, has to have good nutrition for good building blocks to physically grow. And it also has to have great experience. It's the experiential part of life that actually makes those neurons and those brain cells start to come together and make significant pathways of learning that are relevant for long-time function. And I think most of us, especially as parents, are really drilled into this in the early childhood phases. We meticulously watch those early developmental milestones. We want to get out read to our kids every day. We want to get out and do the play dates and the gymborees and all of these other things for stimulation. But I think what gets lost in that message is that there's a second huge phase of neural growth and development that happens in the tween and early teen years. It's not just those first 1,000 days that are critical to long-term growth. And in my opinion, the smartphone is starting to change that experience of life in an early phase of that brain growth, that developmental change, and derailing the three-dimensional interactive experience with life to a two-dimensional flat screen. Science is starting to support this as well. We have early research, obviously, on various things with smartphone introduction in our kids' lives, things like decrease in school performance, changes with attention and focus, increase in bullying, sleep disruption, fine motor delay, sensory integration, all that stuff is real. But interestingly, there was also another study late last year from the NIH, one of the first ones to actually start to show that with hours of screen time, we're seeing physical changes in the growth of the brain. And so as science is starting to catch up with these findings, I think things like Wait Until 8th, talking about these really important issues with screen time, have to start now. We can't wait for a 20-year study in order to make choices for our children today.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha, for bringing up the NIH study. I know that many of our audience are aware of the NIH study and that they've been discussing it. And I think it's very easy for us, like you said, to look at child development as a young child issue. And then as soon as they start looking older and they start acting a little bit older, to forget that there's a developing brain there as well. So one question that I get asked quite a bit that I'm wondering if either one of you could answer is that, well, what if we are aware of this now, but we have an older child, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, what if we haven't waited? What if we've already given them a phone? And then now what do you suggest we do?
Well, the Wait Until 8th pledge was really set up to give families that freedom. When you sign the Wait Until 8th pledge, you are signing per child. So if you've already crossed the bridge with an older child, but you want to switch gears with your second or your third or your fourth, you absolutely can do that and sign for your younger kiddos and take the pledge. And we also have great tips on how you can recalibrate what that smartphone looks like for your older child too, if you want to put some more boundaries in place to rein in screen time a little bit more as well.
Yeah, what kind of things do you suggest, what kind of conversations do you suggest having with your older child, Brooke, in that calibration phase? If you're realizing now, even if you come to this webinar, if you sign up for the Wait Until 8th pledge and then you realize I'd like to make some changes, what kinds of thoughts do you have about that?
Well, I think if you're having that conversation with your older child that already has a smartphone, I think it's really important as a family to determine what you think is a healthy amount of screen time for your child and work together to put that in place. And I think that it's been a little bit made easier now with features like Apple having the screen time feature where you can monitor how much time is being used. So that's one way you can put some goalposts in mind as far as reining it in. I also like to encourage families to just really kind of strip down that smartphone as much as you can for children, because that gives them less to do with it. So removing those gaming apps from the smartphone, removing the social media apps from the smartphone, putting curfews around when they can use it and where they can use it. These are all smart steps that we can take as families to really reduce the amount of time kids are spending on these devices, and really teach them that this is a tool, it's a communication tool. It's not a boredom elimination device that you just pick up whenever you have a free moment, but it's really a tool that we don't want to overuse.
I think tool is a great word, and teaching kids specific uses for them is a fabulous way of being able to communicate with them about it. I wonder, I have twin boys, and they received their first phones that texted at the end of 8th grade by an uncle who was kind of a tech nerd, and that I felt like, oh, now it's all over. Now they're exposed, and that's it. So what would you say to parents who want to wait longer?
I would tell parents who would like to wait longer that you absolutely can wait longer, that the Wait Till 8th pledge is not a promise to give your child a smartphone in the 8th grade. It's a promise to your family and to your community that you're going to hold off at least until 8th grade before you reassess the situation. And some families may determine that their child is ready to have a smartphone at that point, but others may want to hold off a few more years. But what is important to keep in mind is that by having this feasible goal in mind of waiting until at least 8th grade, you're able to really rally your community around that goal. Because what we were finding in our own community is that children had them at 7, 8, 9 years old. So the idea of trying to encourage families to wait until 16, 17, 18, high school graduation, that was just a non-starter. So we really have to do the doable and not let the perfect get in the way of good, and have a nice strong line in the sand and say, like, we're going to hold off until at least this point. And if you as a family are not ready at that point, absolutely wait longer. But I would not let this be like a stumbling block for you in participating in the pledge if you would like to wait longer and thinking that you can't do that with the Wait Till 8th pledge, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, maybe you'll find it's going well. Maybe when your child's 5, you think, oh, 8th grade seems like a long way off. But maybe by the time you get there, it's going so well that you want to keep it going. Yeah. So, Natasha, I'm wondering if you could talk to practitioners for a moment about, it's difficult to bring up this topic with parents. They tend to be defensive. It tends to be a sensitive topic. We think it's discussed all the time, but we're really not sure how to communicate with families about it, how to even broach the topic.
Well, I think, my job gives me a little bit of a competitive advantage because my job is about prevention and child health and wellness. And in my opinion, screen times and using media for moms and dads too is important for our physical and mental health, and it's important for our kids' physical and mental health. So I can witness some red flags of significant delays or significant mental health issues and ask about screen time, how that is important in their lives, and if they think that that's a good place for them to be, or if they think that that's contributive to a negative. There's a lot of different dynamics with how families use screens, obviously. And as a pediatrician, I would say a lot of people do ask for advice. For those who don't, I'm very proud to use some of the excellent materials that Brooke's team has created in my office in the form of messaging that we can hand to our patients, and we have posters on the wall that support this initiative and not just an individual provider, but our whole group supports this effort because we believe in it strongly. And just like any other public health information or public health signage you might have, I think this initiative certainly is in that same category.
Absolutely. Brooke, could you mention where people can find those resources on your website?
Absolutely. So if you just go to waituntil8.org, we have a section called resources, and there's all types of materials and tips and book recommendations to really equip parents and communities with how to move forward on this issue. Great,
super. And we'll mention that again at the end. I want to address an issue that is brought up often as far as the waiting goes, and that's safety. So what if I need to get in touch with my child during the day and it's before, they have the smartphone, before 8th grade?
That's a great question, and we get asked that a lot. And what's important to remember is that the wait until 8th pledge is for smartphones only. So if you need to get in touch with your child before 8th grade, we really encourage parents to consider a home phone or basic phones and flip phones and two-way calling watches. There's even a new product out there by Relay. It's this screenless walkie-talkie that operates on the same network as cell phones. There's all these creative ways that I feel like tech companies are even coming in and answering this need from parents, like how do parents stay in touch with children yet forgo all the distractions and potential dangers that come with a smartphone. So again, I just encourage parents to look at other options. I think what has happened is that we've just been caught up in this tidal wave of technology, and that mom or dad upgrades their iPhone, they have the old iPhone, and it just seems so easy to hand that device over to the 5th grader or 6th grader, and they need to get in touch with them because of soccer practice or what have you. But if you really consider those low tech, I would call them tech-wise options like the flip phones, I think you're really putting your child on a path to reducing screen time and all the distractions that come with the smartphone.
Sure. One of the ways I always put it is we want to know where our kids are going. And if they're going somewhere, we're really talking about the difference between internet access and a connection with you that you might need because of scheduling, because of our world the way it is now. That's a different issue than giving them access to go anywhere on the internet in their pocket or in their backpack or with them.
And I would also add too that I think it's a skill of resiliency and a skill of early adulthood to know how to navigate those situations without those easy tools. I like the fact that my son has to seek out somebody else's landline or run home again to tell me where he's going. These are life skills that you also need to know how to communicate with others, communicate your needs to another adult. And if you constantly just have any sort of tech device that's a two-way street between mom and dad, then I think that's a deficiency that kids start to develop, or even a tether that sometimes becomes too strong.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think even asking for help, asking for a ride home, if you're not able to get in touch with your parents for a ride home, something that we're not necessarily teaching kids when we're keeping them using that tethered sort of methodology with watching our kids. And closely related to that kind of internet safety would also be their online safety with mental wellness and reducing the bullying. Can you comment on how will waiting on the smartphone help to reduce the bullying and support kids' mental health as well?
I think we forget, maybe we say it like this, that when you get a smartphone, the first thing that you lose as a parent, in my opinion, is time. Because now that time is going to be preoccupied by, instead of those quick little conversations that you have with your kids, or that time in the car, or that time sitting around at home, that device is attractive. It is going to be a time suck for them and turn their eyes away from you. And one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest items that's most important in mental health and wellness is a strong connection to someone who loves you. And I fear that some of these kids, instead of reaching to mom and dad, reach for their device when they want comfort and connection. And that is a formative change in brain development that I don't think we've ever seen before, and certainly contributive to the isolation that kids are experiencing and amplifying their experience of mental illness. So I think that having other devices at bay, using them appropriately at home, and avoiding that smartphone is allowing people to get, and parents to get time back, time to build into those resiliency skills and those skills of connection that kids will take with them for many, many more years in order to promote mental wellness.
I think the issue of time is such an important one that you bring up, Natasha, because I think we can't get that time back. We know that we can't get that time back. And one thing I want to bring up that we've addressed in other webinars and that we continue to point out in the Action Network is that those devices are designed to keep the kids attracted to them, that the apps are designed to keep the kids hooked on them. So some parents feel as though it's their fault, or they don't understand why they're losing their kids to the device. Holding off certainly holds them away from that manipulation that's being designed or baked right into the apps and right into the devices.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jean, but I would also add to it, it's for us too. Like, it's for us to be able to engage, just like it works with kids. It certainly works to engage and absolutely consume our time. And it saddens me to watch families who are having dinner at a public restaurant, or certainly even in my own exam room, where kids have questions or trying to engage with their parents, and their parents' eyes are on the screen. So I think it's a nice gut check for all of us to think about how we use that, how we're modeling that behavior, how we're showing balance that's promoting our own physical and mental wellness, and then talking about maybe some pitfalls we've had and how we've managed that to our kids that have those devices. We're all learning together. It's not just finger pointing at the kids. Like, this affects all of us too.
It absolutely does, to the point where I think we've talked about, and you probably heard this with your parents, Brooke, that when we see a family sitting at a restaurant without their devices and talking with each other, or a parent engaged with their child on public transportation, or then we bring that story into the office, or we start seeing that as the exception to the rule, and we certainly don't want that to be happening. So, which is why we're all here today with you. So I would like to hear, and I think our audience would like to hear, have you heard from kids? What do you hear from kids whose parents have signed the pledge? Have they discussed it first with the kids? Have they made a deal? Are they, convincing the kids first? Or are they doing it and then the kids are thinking, wow, what has happened to me? So what are the kids saying about the Wait Until 8th pledge?
Well, we've heard from so many families across the country since we started about the impact that it's had on their family dynamics. And first, from parents, what we've heard is that it's just been a huge stress relief for them, because it really just puts the issue to rest, because the children know that a line has been drawn. They're not going to have a smartphone until at least 8th grade. So all that constant nagging and campaigning stops, and it frees up opportunities to negotiate about other things. But it's a huge relief, I think, for just the whole parent-child dynamic to take that tension out of the relationship and just know that we're not going to revisit this until at least 8th grade. And as far as the children, what we've heard is that so many children are relieved to find out when their friends are waiting too. It makes them feel normal. It makes them feel like they're not alone, that they have peers that are going to have their heads up too. They're not going to be the only one on the bus with their head up. They're not going to be the only one coming out of the school building with their head up. They're not going to be the only one at the party with their head up. They're going to be engaged and to be with their peers. And now that we're into our second year of this movement, we really have heard so many wonderful stories from parents about the impact that this has had in their school, in their community, in their churches. And it really just encourages us to want to tell more parents about it, because it really does, a small decision. It feels so small, like let's hold off to a certain point, but it impacts so many different relationships and dynamics and how your kids are growing up. And so I would say overall, it's been really positive and really helpful for parents to have this tool.
That's great, Brooke, the relief.
Yes.
And bring up all those different social situations where kids, I know that some of the children from our parents that don't do screen time at young ages, they feel as though they've gone on a field trip and they're the only one without being plugged in on that bus for quite a long drive. And that's uncomfortable. And then that creates the pressure that comes home. And so just that pressure relief on both ends is a really great result of the pledge, I think. What about, I know that I got pestered to buy a lot of different toys and buy a lot of different things for my kids when they were younger, but buying a smartphone is not the same. It's the pressure is social for kids. The pressure is the power struggles that it sets up at home are different. And so how does Wait Until 8th help parents with that pestering and the power struggles that emerge from the fact that these things are just available and kids want them?
Well, I think it just helps because It gives parents, first of all, we equip parents with how to talk to their children about why we're waiting. We share with them how to share with the children about the research. And again, just going back to boundaries, putting that healthy boundary in place and saying, we as a family, we follow the research showing it's good to hold off on this. We have made this decision to pledge until at least 8th grade. So if 20 other families from your grade in school, you're not alone. You're going to have friends that are doing this too. I think that's extremely helpful, because it's different if you just, you and your child, we're waiting, nobody else is waiting. Good luck. That's hard.
Yeah.
But this makes it easier to really tell the child that this is why we're waiting. You're waiting with other people, and the decision's been made. And I think that's a relief to both the child and a parent.
I agree. I think, Natasha, you might agree also that telling kids why on many things works. Just being able to interpret those facts and that research on their level, being able to developmentally share with them whatever you can share with them at that point, helps them to feel respected as an individual and part of the plan as we go forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like the Wait Until 8th website does do such a great job to promote these conversations, because I don't want any child to feel like something's literally being ripped out of their hands. This is something that takes time and conversations and developmental appropriateness. But it also, I think, the community surrounding and the community aspect of this initiative is key. Because there are so many parents who feel in their bones that giving their kids a smartphone isn't right. And they need to know that there are other parents that are like them. There are other parents who are making this decision. And so each family can have the conversations, bring their kids into them, but parent confidently and parent from a position of authority to say, this is the decision that we have made. We are not alone. You will not be alone, because other friends have done this, and to bring everybody together. Because just like Brooke said, if you're just saying good luck and you don't have that social structure in place, it would be no different than sending my middle schooler into the bathroom with somebody vaping and saying, oh, good luck. Well, I don't know what you're going to say when someone asks you to vape, right? You're preparing all of these kids for these really important decisions and these times and places when they need to make those decisions themselves. And this is a very feasible way to do that.
I think it's an empowering program, because when we think about these phases that they're going to go through when they do get a smartphone, you're not going to just hand it to them either at 8th grade or at 9th grade or whenever you're going to do it. You're going to be having been talking with them about it all along, been talking with other parents about it, their peers will have been on board with it, and you'll be able to introduce it in sort of a measured way that will help the kids grow into it. And a couple of webinars ago, we talked about the patterns in early childhood that lead to addiction. And there's a lot of talk about addiction. The word's thrown out there, and even I think some teens will say, oh, I'm addicted to my phone. Some of us say, oh, I'm addicted to my phone. We can't put it down, or we feel insecure if we left it at home and we went to work for the day. And so a program like this is helping kids to be set up for healthy use later on in life. I think that's a really, if either of you want to address that.
I completely agree. What I try to encourage parents to do whenever they do make the decision to give their child a smartphone is that you do want to have those conversations with your child. You do want to prepare them for that next phase. And at Wait Till 8th, we're actually developing materials right now for after Wait Till 8th. What do you do? How do you make that transition? And I think key to that is that you never want to hand over a child for the first time a fully loaded smartphone with all the bells and whistles. You want to, just as you would if they were starting to drive, they just turned 16, you don't hand over the keys of the car without restrictions and parameters in place and instruction in place. You want to go about giving your child a smartphone in the same way. You want to teach them intentionally and slowly, baby steps on how to use this technology. And you really want them to earn different responsibilities on it. And I think where some families are faltering on this is that they are just handing over everything at once. And it's really hard for these children with their not fully developed brain to really figure out how to navigate so much technology in the palm of their hand. So we really want to be very intentional. We want to teach our children how to use smartphones safely, how to use them moderately, how to use them appropriately. We want to model that behavior. We want to always follow up with instructions. And we want to take this process slowly, not quickly.
Wouldn't it be great if there was a smartphone ad like the driver's ad? I love that analogy. It's a perfect analogy. And I think, we here at the network and you at Wait Until 8th, we try to provide those resources for parents to have the conversations with their kids, and that those conversations are what's going to create lasting values. And one thing, Natasha, maybe you can speak to is I love the American Academy of Pediatrics Family Media Plan, because it makes us look at what are our values as a family, put in the other activities that are most important first, and then see how much time is left for device use, which is often not a lot if we think about it ahead of time.
No, absolutely. It's a great tool, and it's a great conversation tool. And the AAP's guide is also age-based. So you can take age-based recommendations, because just like earlier in a discussion when we talked about maybe having an older child that has a phone and the younger ones coming through, the recommendations for each age should be different. We can't parent every single child of every single age that's currently in our home exactly the same way on screens. And so the Family Use Guide is very nice to give us those age-based kind of parameters, but then have that discussion, use it as a tool to say, boy, do you really like playing Legos, or do you like playing Minecraft? What do you like doing better? And having those discussions about both are okay, but let's try to prioritize one or the other on different days, or however that looks for the family, in order to do what we want, but still have those barriers put into place, just like Brooke mentioned, the importance of barriers as we go through the day. Not every day, obviously, is perfect, but it does give us some nice benchmarks to try to reach, and a wonderful place to start.
Great. We have our Screen Free Week coming up, April 29th to May 5th, and often we hear kids say, afterwards, I didn't realize how much I missed my Legos. So we're all talking about giving them an opportunity to see what do they like, what do they enjoy, and maybe this is part of it, but it's not all of it. Screen time is not all of it. So, Brooke, can you give us a sense of the reach of Wait Until 8th and how it's spreading, how it's growing?
We have about 20,000 families who have signed the pledge.
Fabulous.
It's been such an amazing ride. We have really just been fueled by the passion and the grit of many volunteers, and just became an official nonprofit recently. So we're really excited to see what some much needed funds will do to help us really propel this movement to the next level. So we have 20,000 families. We'd love to ultimately have 1 million families, and ultimately raise that national age of when a child gets a smartphone from 10 years old to 14 years old. It would be an amazing shift in our culture, I think, if more kids had their heads up and down.
It would. And so how do parents and how do practitioners who are going to recommend this to parents, what do they do?
The first thing that you need to do is go to waituntil8th.org, and there you can get all kinds of tips and resources, and you can also sign the pledge from there or make a donation. And from there, you'll get all types of information from us. We'll send you an email about how to spread the word in your community, in your school, in your different, in your practice. And we really want to come alongside you and make this very turnkey and doable to do within your own community.
Great. So I think we have quite a few questions. Sam, are we ready to go to some questions?
Yes, we are, Jean. So we're going to start out with a question from Chelsea. And Chelsea asks, how do you propose the Wait Until 8th campaign to your community? Through their school? Through your parent group? What have other people done?
Well, the Wait Until 8th pledge is a parent-led movement. So while some schools have really been champions of it and they have started it on their own, many times it just starts with 1 or 2 voices coming together saying that they want to make a difference at their school. And it starts with one simple pledge, and you can do that right after this webinar. You just go onto the site, you make a pledge, and then it starts to spread that way. Usually we encourage parents to start with people they know in their child's grade and then work out from there. So you start within your child's grade, then you find advocates in other grades, then you find advocates in other schools within your district, and you spread out from there.
We all know that parents whose kids go together end up being friendly, and I love it that you said just one or two voices. That's all it takes to start.
Absolutely.
Now, related to that question, this week we got an email from somebody who was looking to introduce the Wait Until 8th pledge in her child's kindergarten class. And she was concerned because she didn't really know anybody else in the class or in the school, really. And she was concerned about approaching other parents who might think she was coming off as judgmental when she talked about their kids' screen time or smartphone use. So do you have any specific tips or strategies for this parent as she tries to introduce this into a community that is also new to her?
Well, on our website, we have some different ideas as far as emails go and how you can present this as a positive tool for parents to rally behind and how to present it in a positive light. As far as like this particular case with her children only being in kindergarten, she may want to wait 6 months to 8 months and really try to form those friendships first. And, you know, having maybe perhaps a book club, maybe you select a book from one of our recommended books just to start the conversation and eventually build enough of a community before you launch into spreading the pledge.
I think even asking parents to join the Screen Time Action Network and to hop on some of our other webinars will give them the tools and the confidence to be able to go back.
Okay, we have another question here. Also about getting parents on board in one's community. So when you're trying to get parents on board with the pledge, do you find that there are worries about social media, family relationships, school performance? What are you really hearing from parents when this starts getting proposed in the community?
I think it depends on the parent and the community. Different communities have usually a particular concern in mind. One, it may be social media. Another one, it could be academic distraction. Another one, if a community has been struggling with like a recent teen suicide, it could be a mental health issue. I think it really depends on the community. But I think most parents out there, if they look at our reasons of why to hold off, I think most parents would be concerned on some level on each of those concerns, whether it's mental health, bullying, pornography, sexting, sexual predators. There's a whole host of issues and reasons on why to be concerned and why to delay the smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
Natasha, can you also comment on that as far as parents worrying about all those issues? Sometimes it feels like an overwhelming thing to deal with the children's screen time. And this is a great tool to be able to hold it off, but parents are hearing it everywhere.
Yeah, no, and for all of the reasons Brooke brought up, I think that's all what I hear in my office too, from families who are asking about questions. I also think that a lot of families are worried if they have a personal family history of addictive behaviors or have noticed mental health changes with other family members who have used their phones and gotten into inappropriate places or places that are not healthy. Obviously, we know that there are wonderful places online to turn, and kids do get to have many positive relationships there too. But it's the things that Brooke brought up. It's the pornography, addictive behaviors, bullying, and mental health that are really real problems as well. And I think at the end of the day, like I've never heard a parent that has come in and said, man, I just really wish we would have gotten our daughter on Snapchat 2 years ago. Like, these tools are very intuitive. These kids catch up quickly when these are introduced. It becomes all consuming. I don't feel like you're withholding something of great value when you are talking about withholding the smartphone. What has great value in protecting mental wellness and against pornography and that kind of stuff is limiting the places where you think there's going to be accidental exposure. And if your family's concerned about that, certainly delaying the smartphone, but also thinking about your other tech devices just in number as you're looking globally at your family plan.
and your physical space, where
Yeah.
they live at night.
Exactly.
Yes, all different places, but yes, Sam.
Okay, so Mary asks, as a director of a pre-K program, I see so many young children with phones and tablets, it's alarming. How can I encourage parents of young children to restrict the use of screen time?
Tasha, do you want to take that? Do you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
I think if she, it sounds like she's a teacher or she's the director. I didn't catch the third part.
Director.
So I think she's in a position of great authority as a director. She could, I'm sure there's some type of newsletter at the preschool or some type of communications that she could send home on backpacks. And it could just be like, as a preschool, let's read this book together. There's so many great books on this topic, and maybe she drills down that way. Or maybe it's having some type of expert panel come in and talk to the parents of preschoolers. Or maybe it's some type of workshop for the parent and the child to learn about it. There's so many different ways that you can start the conversation wherever your community may be. And I think since she's in a position of influence of being a director of the preschool, I think a lot of those parents would be really up for hearing her advice and any type of resources or tools that she could offer to help alleviate what's going on with screen time with these families.
I think it's really important to talk about that director position, Brooke, where they're able to make suggestions. And there are a lot of early childhood educators who are with us right now want to be able to say something to parents. They want something other than their own shock to deal with it, and their own surprise that children have it at such a young age. And the programs like this can help take the fear away, that if they think it could be something that spreads, that is spreading in communities, that brings hope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a really good question, but I'm very interested to hear the answer for this one. Catherine writes, how are you working to make this equitable for all socioeconomic groups? The New York Times has recently reported on the growing divide between upper socioeconomic groups advocating hard against screens, while underserved groups are relying more and more on screens.
Well, the pledge is parent-led at this point. And so, and as I mentioned before, we've just been going a couple years. We just officially became a nonprofit. So the people that are engaged in our community at this point are those that have heard about it word of mouth. And our ultimate hope with Wait Till 8th is to build that awareness. And as we have more funds coming into our organization, we'll be able to develop more outreach programs for all socioeconomic communities and really reach the kids that need us the most.
And that's a great opportunity for clinicians and providers out there to be able to cross those boundaries with the different groups. We know kids that in lower socioeconomic settings also have higher trauma scores. There's other baseline risks for them in which using a smartphone is going to be fuel to the fire for their existing deficits. And clinicians and compassionate providers who work for those organizations, I think, have the opportunity not only to talk about it, but maybe dig into the unique reasons why their particular community is using that as a tool. Because I think in every community, regardless of class, you all have your hot buttons. So it's really trying to find in that community what is going to resonate.
And so, Natasha, are you finding that clinicians are able to tie specific issues that they see with the smartphone use or with the screen use, and then are they able to communicate that with families as well?
I think so. I mean, I think families are ripe to hear it, and certain groups honestly don't know. I think it's easier for the younger kids. It's very easy to say you have a fine motor delay, you're having sensory integration, you're seeing delay in integration of basic reflexes. I mean, these are very organic problems that we're seeing in the younger kids, and a really easy way is to use that as a stepping stone, obviously because those kids need help, but to be able to bring to light those particular choices and how different choices may be optimizing that early childhood development. All parents want to see their kids thrive, right? All parents want to see their kids improve. And if that is an avenue where we're truly seeing deficit, it's a great kind of non-threatening way to say, well, oh, wait a minute, you're doing what? Oh, let's change this and let's see this amazing progress with your kiddo, especially for the kids who are seeing delays. Unfortunately, we have to start to see delays to bring that up, right? But it's certainly a way where you can put a positive spin on a kid's development without being accusatory.
Yes, and I think we can translate that, scenario that you just explained to those early childhood directors as well, and to educators who are with parents and, might be reluctant that when they see a certain milestone not being reached, or they see something that might be able to be improved by the child being unplugged, then that's an opening.
And I think parents are being deceived by these companies too. Parents are being deceived by these early learning programs, these early learning tools that, so I think there's a genuine level of needing these conversations, because parents are being hoodwinked intentionally by these corporations and devices, thinking they're giving their child a competitive advantage when they are not. And that's a perfect opportunity for professionals, clinicians, therapists to step in and say, wait. I see I understand what you're thinking, but let me tell you what the evidence is.
Yes, and this conversation is very familiar to us here at the network. And then Brooke was saying earlier that they are working to get the research together, so that that's a place where we can go and we have that research that we can use, because parents are often just not aware that they are being manipulated as well.
Absolutely. And what we're hearing from so many families that have signed the pledge is that because of the pledge, they've been able to link up with other families who have screen time concerns. And they're not only rallying around the pledge, but then they're also able to rally around other issues when it comes to tech and screens. So a huge issue that many families are struggling with across the country is the use of screens in schools and the overuse of screens in schools, whether it be the iPhone being out in the classroom all the time, or the overuse of iPads and Chromebooks. And I think it's been really empowering for parents to know that they're not the only ones with these concerns, and they're able to link up with other parents because of the pledge and advocate for positive choices in their school district together. And that is so much more powerful to have a group of parents come together on a particular issue to address concern versus the parent feeling isolated or alone with their concerns.
I think that's a huge takeaway from today, Brooke and Natasha, is that relief that we're bringing to parents by saying we're doing this together, and we're not just out there trying to figure it out by ourselves or trying to implement something and feeling like we're going uphill or going against the tide. And I can just sense that relief, and I'm glad to hear you telling us that families are experiencing it, that it's working.
Absolutely.
Sam, do we have other questions?
Yes, we certainly do. So here's a question that I'm sure that many of us are familiar with, one that is a personal annoyance of mine. But a lot of critics of screen time advocacy, they'll say, oh, you're making a big deal out of nothing. This is all just harmless. It's just like every other moral panic that parents have had in the past. And besides, kids need to learn how to use this technology. So what are your responses when you hear people give critiques like that?
Natasha, do you want to tackle that, or you want me
to? So I think, yeah, I do hear that. Obviously, there is that resistance, and I think it goes to the people. You choose who you want to listen to. And get impacted by a community in which is going to be like-minded for you. Unfortunately, the counter argument is the research and the evidence is not supporting that stance. And if it was harmless, and if our kids were thriving by using these tools, then I don't think that we would see as many deficits, and we certainly would see a global rise in our national testing scores if everyone was making super smart babies with using all of this stuff. So I don't think that you can argue with the evidence to the negative. I think there is certainly wonderful things that you can do with technology. Like I do think it's important that these kids learn the skill sets, but that does not need to happen when they are in a phase of developmental growth that needs foundational building blocks in order to learn how to be creative and effective and emotionally resilient as you age.
I think those building blocks are going to be what turns those parents around, is understanding those developmental building blocks and that we can't go back. That so when that time comes, but if that time comes in preschool, like one of our viewers questioned earlier, then what are we going to be missing between then and 8th grade if we don't do something like this?
And I think what's important to keep in mind too is what are technology executives doing in their own homes? And many of them do not want their children on these screens. They don't want their kids having a smartphone until they're 14, 15, 16, some even to high school graduation. They don't want them going to schools with tablets and Chromebooks shoved into their hands. They want them to go to low-tech schools. And so they are making deliberate choices to keep their kids off of screen time as much as possible. And they are living and breathing tech all day long. They're behind it. They love technology. That's how they make their living. Yet that should give us all pause. If tech executives are doing this in their own homes, should we not at least ask why? And what is the reasoning for it? And what key takeaways can we take from their best practices on screens and kids?
I think that's a perfect approach, Brooke, and something that we think about quite frequently because we hear about what those tech parents are doing, and we all get parents who say to us, you know, I'm worried that my kids won't have the skills they need or the 21st century skills, and there are buzzwords out there that work against what we're saying right now. And if we, you know, point to those people and those parents that know much more than what we know, maybe we can learn something from it. Sam.
Yeah, of course. So we're getting a lot of people asking, you know, why smartphones? Kids have access to so many other devices, you know, whether it's a TV at home, a tablet at a friend's house or at school. Why specifically smartphones? What makes them so different?
I think a smartphone is very different than a tablet because the mobility factor of the smartphone, you can put it in your pocket, you can walk around with it anywhere, and you don't see too many kids walking around with an iPad in their pocket. It's usually limited to the home or to travel. Whereas the smartphone, once you grant that wish, it's usually with the kid all the time, unless they're sleeping. And sometimes it's underneath the pillow while they're sleeping. It's just always available. So I definitely think it's different than a tablet. I think it's completely different than a TV. A TV, where I don't want my children watching TV all the time, it's not having that same effect as far as the reward notification process of all the apps that are going on the smartphone, and Natasha can speak far better to this than I can as far as the dopamine effect happening on kids' brains and how that's changing pathways and how it's leading to some of these addictive natures. I think it's very different than previous technology, the smartphone, very different from the TV.
And I think we've already given the answer, and the answer is time. As soon as you give that smartphone, it is going to be them on them all the time. And if you're trying to intercede with that, with being a parent and engaging with your kid, it is very different than just having the TV when they have a couple hours to hang out and veg out, and then they're leaving the home to go to their soccer practice. They're leaving that toy, they're leaving that attractive device behind, so it's not going to consume them. Once it's in the back pocket, you lose that control.
I think the smallness and then also the isolation of it, like we're talking about TV, they're likely watching that with a sibling, with a friend, with a parent, like the AAP recommends, co-viewing. There's a social aspect to the other devices that isn't there with the smartphone. Typically, they're watching it alone.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, what else do we have?
So we have another question from Catherine. She asks, do you think a statewide ban on cell phones in schools would support the healthy development of kids? California is attempting the legislation. France has banned phones for elementary and middle school students, and Ontario has it on the table. What are your thoughts?
I would be all for more legislation on this issue. I think that there's a lot of misuse of smartphones during the school day. And what we know from research is that when phones are banned from the classrooms, grades go up and bullying goes down. Kids are able to focus on learning, and they don't have as much time to beat up on each other on social media when they don't have access to the phone that 7 or 8 hours a day at school. And unfortunately, many school districts do not have strong stances on this, and they are very permissive about how phones are used in the classroom. Some are even encouraging children to bring phones to the classroom because they don't have the financial means to actually have a one-to-one device where they could do the learning on a tablet. So they're encouraging kids to bring phones. And so I think the more that community leaders and legislators and people can get involved to really encourage schools to put smartphone policies in place, I think that this would incredibly benefit our children.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a health and wellness issue. I completely agree with everything Brooke said. I'd love to hear from an educator perspective. I'm not an educational technologist, but for the feedback that we're getting, not only with the smartphones in the classroom, but even how kids are manipulating the Chromebooks and the one-on-one and the devices that the schools are issuing, getting around those blocks and getting around the safety nets that the school's putting on the devices in order to use them as a distraction tool. I think it even is starting to go beyond the smartphones, but I think it's a complicated issue. It's like layers of an onion, especially when you're talking about the public health or the public school system. And I don't think it's easy, but I would stand with Brooke and also support similar legislation.
And I think if you're watching or if you're with us today and you're interested in doing more with regards to smartphones in schools and screens in schools in general, go to screentimenetwork.org and look at our working group, our Screens in Schools working group, which is very active in supporting the legislation that was passed in Maryland, the legislation that is proposed in Oregon, and helping states and school districts to be able to look at these issues and set some guidelines where now there are none. Okay, so we would like to officially close to respect the time of those of you who have to hop off. Thank you for being with us at this Children's Screen Time Action Network webinar. Thank Brooke and thank Natasha for being with us for their expertise. But Brooke and Natasha have graciously agreed to stay on if we have additional questions. Sam, do we have additional questions?
We do. So we've received a few questions. Parents are wondering, what if you give your kid a dumbed down smartphone, so to speak, where all apps are removed except calling and texting? Is that okay with the Wait Until 8th pledge, or are you still pro flip phone?
Well, the whole ethos of the Wait Until 8th pledge is to really support each other within a community and to hold off together. And so while I think that giving a child a dumbed-down smartphone is better than giving them a smartphone, and for all appearances' sake, to a child, it still looks like a smartphone. And so that peer pressure aspect to have a smartphone is still there. So we ask parents who are going to sign the Wait Till 8th pledge to really promise not to give any type of smartphone until at least 8th grade. Now, I do think that if you have already given your child a smartphone and you want to rein it in a little bit, that you should absolutely look into stripping it down and taking off some of the bells and whistles to help reduce that distraction for your child.
Okay. Sorry, Jane, do you want to comment on that?
No, go ahead. That was a great answer. Thank you.
So we touched a little bit about the brain development of young children in this webinar, but some people were interested in how smartphones might impact the brain development of teens. Have that second really important phase of development. And as you both mentioned, 14 is a good age to wait until, but waiting even longer could be better. So if you could elaborate on, teen development and smartphone use.
I think when we're transitioning through the life cycle from 0 to 18 years of life, and some would argue mid-20s when we finally finish developing, that those early childhood years are so important with those formative literacy and emotional connections, the basic skills that everyone likes to promote within reputable and needed pre-K programs for all these young people. When I think about the needs and the growth and regulation that happens in a teenager, I think about the refinement of the social emotional complex, the refinement of executive functioning and frontal lobe development as we get closer to adulthood. That's where we see in our tweens and teens that impulsive emotional dysregulation. I get angry and I run up to my room and I slam the door. Those type of impulsive type behaviors that are normal for growing teenagers, those are the type of situations where we need to be able to actually sit eyeball to eyeball and talk about how we can control our bodies, how we can build into emotional regulation processes that are being derailed by the smartphone. The smartphone, as Brooke alluded to, is using chemical pathways in order to build addictive behaviors. And if those are the pathways, the neurological pathways that are being strengthened during that formative phase of teen learning, then you are developing a brain that's only going to be able to be calmed by looking at a smartphone, or to be aroused by looking at a smartphone, or to be excited or be satisfied by getting a like or getting someone to share their stuff. It is becoming the emotional pacifier that should be built into by one-to-one interaction with real humans. And when you have that smartphone in the pocket, you are derailing the time that it takes, maybe even the uncomfortable times or the times where it's difficult. You're taking away the times where we might feel lonely or sad, which is really appeasable by that device. But it's really important for kids to be lonely and sad when they're in a safe place like somebody's home where people unconditionally love them, right? Before they're off to college, for example, and have those same feelings and have no formative brain function to be able to compensate for those emotions. So those are the type of things that I think about, really that resiliency skill set that's being refined and established and really preparing them for the rest of the brain development. And we get into the early 20s and quite honestly, such huge life phases that are happening with independence and learning and growth and creativity as kids hit their late teens and early 20s.
It's so important to talk about those pathways and developing them when they're younger than 8th grade. And I find that the conversation, you both might find this, around screen time can be segmented by ages. We can talk about, well, early childhood screen use, elementary screen use, and then we tend to talk about teens like they're not children. And I think it's important for us to remember they're still our children. We're still watching out for them. And 2 programs in the network, the No App for Life Challenge, and then the 10-day screen-free challenge that happens through EduPACs in Canada and France, challenge the teens themselves to be off their cell phones of their own volition, of their own choice, not because some parent or some teacher told them to do it, but because they want to challenge themselves. And often they find the growth is amazing, and then when they go back to it, they use it in a different way. So I think it's really important for us to know what we're setting up now by choosing Wait Until 8th is going to impact who they are when they're teens.
Okay.
So, do we have more questions?
You bet. So we have a question about adult smartphone use. So I'm sure all of us here today I'm sure many of us have smartphones. I, for one, have a smartphone. I work in an organization that advocates for the reduction of screen time, and yet I find myself sometimes struggling with how I use my smartphone and how much time I spend on it. And when I'm around the kids in my life, I want to make sure that I'm setting a good example. So what advice would you have for me and others like me who, they might not have Facebook, but they're checking New York Times and CNN for like the latest crazy news. What tips do you have?
Well, there's a few different things that you can put in practice right away. I mean, one would be, let's not have your smartphone in your bedroom. I think that's a great practice that you can model to your children. We know from research that it's not good to have the smartphone in your bedroom when you go to sleep. So a good step would be to, at a certain time, check in your smartphone. Maybe it's in the kitchen or the living room or your office in your house. So it's out of sight and out of mind, and you're really using that time before you go to bed to unplug. I'm also a huge fan of device-free dinners. Whether you're at home or you're in a restaurant, making that a priority as a family, I think sets an excellent example for your children, and allows you to be together as a family. I also like to, I would say, banish smartphones from the ordinary. So I would think just trying to make a practice of not automatically going to your smartphone whenever you have a few minutes in the waiting room while you're waiting for the dentist or the doctor, and instead maybe have a book always in your purse. I think all these small steps help you reduce the amount of time that you're on your smartphone, and it models good, healthy tech behavior to your children. So when they look back, they're not going to remember mom's head down to the phone, but maybe they look up from the soccer field and mom's head is reading a book, or mom is talking to another mom. And I think these are all great steps that we can take. Are they easy? They're a little challenging sometimes, but they're definitely doable.
Yeah, I love the, I definitely want kids and parents to get those devices out of their rooms at night. Sleep is formative for cognitive and physical development. And I'm interestingly enough, we made that choice with our own family, and we kind of have a group policy that everybody grabs a book at the door before they go anywhere. And in my purse, I always have a deck of Uno cards. And it's really interesting, actually, when you're waiting in a restaurant, for example, and you whip out Uno, strange kids will put down their devices and come over and playing with you. We forget that kids want interaction, and they want to play. And when they're given those opportunities, I think it's quite eye-opening that maybe we thought it was the best thing that we could do. That was like really cool for us to be able to give this 7-year-old an iPhone, but like Uno with a buddy is really as engaging and interesting as life can be. And so we made those choices too. It's been a lot of fun to see people's reaction and have them join in when we do play cards at restaurants. We have a lot of the waitresses and wait staff will come up and ask what game we're playing, and sometimes play along too. So it's that formative, like, childhood communication of play and loving of books. That is a small step, but I feel that it has been meaningful and really a topic starter for our family. And my kids will talk about it and say, "Hey, Mom, do you have the Uno? I see that kid over there and I want to play with them."
I think that's such a great point, Natasha, that kids want this actual social interaction, and they'll ask for it if you're not providing them with the phone. And I'm not sure if it was you, Brooke, or someone else who brought this story to me this week, that a parent decided to take the phone away that they'd already given to a child and said, well, what deal can we make? And it was a daughter about 10 years old, and the daughter just said, well, could I have some Starbucks gift certificates so that I could go hang out with my friends? And that just totally made her happy to just have a place that wasn't under her parents' eyes, to be able to hang out with their friends, and that they want that desperately. So
for adults too, I do like the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. It's a newer book. It kind of walks you through the steps as an adult to look at your smartphone and design it to serve you instead of you serving it. It has a very distinct plan you can walk through to really decide what's important. I thought it was an engaging book, and certainly gave me a lot of ideas of how I am actually designing my device to not or to try and resist some of that addictive behavior that I know that we all have.
That's a great recommendation. Thanks, Natasha. And I think the modeling issue could probably be its own webinar. It's definitely something that we need to keep talking about, how parents are modeling use and non-use of their phones. So if you're on your phone for a certain period of time, talking about, well, I'm checking my work email for the next 10 minutes, then I'm putting it down. So kids know there is a use for it, and then there's a time to not use it. Sam, I think I have time for one more question.
And I have one great question to finish this webinar. So we would like to hear a success story. Could you tell us about a community where parents have organized and taken the pledge? And are they active, and how are they feeling about it today?
It's hard to pick which one. There's so many communities across the country that are so vibrant and active, and it's encouraging to hear their success stories. There's one in California, and it's in Mill Valley, California, which is just right outside the San Francisco Bay Area. And hundreds of parents had taken the pledge, and it's really starting to take off in that community. And I've heard from so many different moms about how it's really reduced the pressure in their own community to have these smartphones. Same story outside of New York and Westchester. I've heard the same thing where every grade at that school is active. Parents are on board. That's filtering down to parents of younger kids, and it's really starting to spread. And we have a similar community in New Jersey that's doing the same success story. It really just takes a few active pledges to kick off, and then it just spreads like wildfire, and it becomes more of the norm. Like, oh, this is what we do. We wait until at least 8th grade, and it becomes more of the path to take versus the aberration, which is so encouraging to hear as well.
In our community, we have a lot of school groups in which the parents had started talking about wait until 8th within their school community, and now have a whole new social circle. Like that's who they want their friends to hang out with, and they have made some lasting friendships within that community just by opening up and talking about a common interest. And it's interesting to hear from the kids as well. They do tell me that their anxiety is down. They do tell me that they feel comfortable because they know other kids are like them. This wait until 8th is working.
Great. Well, that's such a hopeful note for us to go off on. Thank you so much, Brooke Shannon and Dr. Natasha Burgert, for being with us today, for spreading the word about wait until 8th. Please, our network members who are here with us, spread the word, and a great, great solution for our families to try. We'll see you next time.